So the easiest way to stitch some pieces together is to stitch from starting edge to finishing edge, just because you have the nice little V's here to stitch into. And then on this edge, this is the wrist warmer that we're making, we have these little loops that we can see very easily. If you were trying to stitch something together side seam to side seam, that's a little bit more difficult, and we'll discuss that in another video. But let's go ahead and stitch our wrist warmer together first, and we're just going to use the whip stitch for this seam. And the whip stitch seam is probably the easiest of all seaming stitches, just because you're, just going in and out of the stitch. So what we want to do is we want to put our stitches together so they're lining up. So we're going to line this first stitch up to this stitch, and this stitch is our turning chain, so we just want to kind of stitch it into the top of the stitch the best that we can. And so I just like to pull it through once, and then since this is the first stitch we're doing, we're going to anchor it a little bit. So I like to do kind of a figure 8. So we've gone from the top of this one down under. So now we need to come back, and to make the 8, we're going to do something like this. And so we're going to go back up under this side. And this is how I like to start off all of my seaming stitches, just so you get this nice edge. So we've just gone through here, and we're just going to pull it tight. And that kind of secures that first seam there. And then we're just going to do the whip stitch from here on out. And so to do the whip stitch, the easiest way I've found to do it is to always go over and under, and then over and under, and over and under again. We're going to go through this second stitch right here, go through both V's of that one, and then we're going to go through just this loop of this second stitch on this side. So you're just going to go like this and pull your yarn all the way through, and then just do that again for the next stitch. And so this is called the whip stitch because you're kind of whipping it together. I find that this stitch looks really good a lot of the time because it's easily hidden. You can't really see it as well. There are some other stitches that are even more invisible, but they work better for other types of projects. So if you're stitching something into a tube, I would say the whip stitch method works really well because you can't see it as well. If you're doing granny squares, there's a different method that I'll show you in another video that makes it pretty invisible. I had a problem with my yarn breaking, so that's why my yarn right here looks a little bad. I didn't want to stitch up another wrist warmer to show you, so I'm just trying to make do with what I have right now. But you just keep going along the edge of this wrist warmer. In the same manner, just keep, and don't make your stitches too tight because you do want it, that's kind of what you want it to look like. And see, if you look down here, so that's kind of like the middle of these two stitches, so that would be like right here on this stitch. You can tell they're not completely different. I mean, you can kind of tell that this one's a little bit different than this, but it's almost, it blends in a lot. You're going to be the only person that realizes that that's the way it looks. Gonna come back through. You want to make sure you just get in the loops, otherwise you can have a little snag like I just had there because I was looking at the camera and not at my work. So I'm just going to finish this up, do the same with yours, and then when we get to the end I'll show you how to anchor that off. With the last couple of stitches here, so let's just do these together. This is the second to last. And then this last one, we're just going to go through both sides of the V of the last stitch of the turning chain, and then this stitch over here. And this is the one we're going to anchor off, so we're going to do that same figure 8 motion. So we came up under this one, so we're going to go down under this one over here, just to anchor it off. And you can go back over here again just to make sure that it is knotted. And sometimes you can even go underneath this little loop right here just to make sure it's really secure. And so now see that edge right there isn't going anywhere. It's good and tight. That's important because you don't want it to come apart at the beginning of the seam, because that's the easiest place for it to come apart. So if you do that figure 8 motion when you start and stop a seam, that really keeps it from getting messed up in the long run, especially with something like this that you're going to be stretching over an area of your body. So now we're just going to turn this inside out and then just weave in the seam edge so we can cut our yarn. And I'm just kind of weaving it back and forth underneath this edge here. And this one you probably want to go one way and then go back another way just to make sure, again, that it's secure, that the seam isn't going to come out. This is probably the most important end that you'll weave in through the process. Now I'm going to cut it. And then this tube might look a little small for your arm, but it stretches a lot, so let's see if it fits. So yeah, it fit pretty well, and it stretched out to fit my hand, even though it's quite a small little tube there. So you should have a finished wrist warmer. So seam up your second one and post a picture in the Flickr group so we can all see.